Hey everyone, welcome back. We're doing a deep dive today into conflict resolution.
Ooh, conflict resolution.
Yeah, and we've got some really interesting sources for this one.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Okay, so we've got helpguide.org, which is always great for practical advice.
Right, practical stuff.
And then we're also looking at the University of Washington's Husky Experience Toolkit.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, it's like their student resource for, you know, navigating all the challenges of college life.
Makes sense.
But then to shake things up a little bit, we've got a relationship therapy blog post.
Ooh, getting personal.
And to make things really interesting,
Yeah.
we're throwing in a choose-your-own-adventure style guide on conflict by Mark Manson.
Okay, that's a pretty wild mix.
It is right.
Yeah, I mean, conflict shows up in so many different ways in our lives.
Exactly. And that's why I'm excited to dive into all these different perspectives.
Me too.
Because we're not just going for like a surface level, how to win an argument kind of thing.
Right.
We really want to understand the psychology of conflict.
Oh.
Like what's really going on beneath the surface.
The deeper stuff.
Yeah, and how can we make choices that protect our well-being even when things get messy?
Love that.
So before we get into specific strategies and tips,
Yeah,
let's just start with the basics. Like, what is conflict, really?
that's a great question to start with.
Right.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting is that all of these sources,
Yeah.
despite being so different,
Yeah.
they all seem to agree that conflict is fundamentally about perception.
A perception.
It's not necessarily about, like, the objective facts of a situation. It's
Okay.
about how we're interpreting those facts
Yeah.
and how threatened we feel by them.
I like that.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Because it's not always about the thing itself.
Totally.
It's about what that thing represents to us.
Yeah. Helpguide.org puts it really well. They say conflict isn't simply disagreement.
Okay.
It's about a perceived threat to our needs.
Oh, that's good.
Right.
Yeah.
And the UW toolkit uses these super relatable examples.
Yeah.
You know, think about those dreaded group projects where, one person isn't pulling their weight.
Oh, yeah. Or that roommate who never does the dishes.
Exactly. Stuff like that.
Yeah, it's like instantly you're like, oh, yeah. Been there.
Totally. And it makes you realize that conflict really is universal.
Get it.
We've all been in situations where we felt like our needs weren't being met.
Totally.
And that feeling is what triggers that whole conflict response.
Right. And speaking of that response,
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but when I feel that sense of threat,
Uh-huh.
my gut reaction is not always the most productive.
Oh, tell me about it.
It's like my brain goes into fight or flight mode
Yeah.
before I even have time to process what's happening.
Totally.
Like, what am I even reacting to?
I know, it's like that instant visceral reaction.
Yeah.
And both helpguide.org and the UW toolkit
Okay.
talk about this tendency to react impulsively
Yeah.
rather than thoughtfully in conflict situations.
Right. We're not exactly our best selves in those moments.
No, not at all.
So Help Guide uses this brilliant analogy.
Ooh, I love a good analogy.
It's foot on the gas or foot on the brake to describe those stress responses.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So imagine like you're driving
Okay, yeah,
and suddenly something unexpected happens.
right.
Your instinct is either going to be to slam on the gas
Oh, yeah,
or slam on the brakes.
to avoid the obstacle.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So foot on the gas in a conflict,
Yeah.
that would be like exploding in anger,
Oh, yeah.
getting super defensive,
Right, right.
or maybe even resorting to like personal attacks.
Oh, those are the worst.
It's that feeling of needing to win at all costs,
Yeah.
even if it means damaging the relationship in the process.
Yeah, that's not good.
And then there's the foot on the brake response.
Okay, the opposite.
Yeah, which is all about shutting down, withdrawing, or completely avoiding the conflict.
Right, yeah, the silent treatment.
Exactly.
Classic.
And it might seem like the nicer option.
Yeah, it seems less aggressive.
Right. But it can actually be just as detrimental
Oh, really?
because it prevents any real resolution from happening.
Oh, I see.
It's like you're just sweeping the problem under the rug.
Yeah, and it's just going to fester there.
Exactly. And eventually that rug's going to get really lumpy.
Right, and you're going to trip over it eventually.
Exactly.
So it's like we're either flooring it towards a head-on collision or slamming on the brakes and getting stuck in a ditch.
And neither option is getting us where we want to go.
No.
So what's the alternative?
Well, that's where emotional intelligence comes in.
Okay, emotional intelligence.
Both Help Guide and the UW Toolkit emphasize how important it is
Okay.
to be aware of our own emotional state
Okay.
and to be able to regulate our reactions.
Especially in those high-stress moments.
Especially then.
Yeah, because that's when it's the hardest
It
to
is.
think clearly.
Totally. And HelpGate actually has this really cool self-assessment quiz.
Oh, a quiz.
Yeah.
I love a good quiz.
To help you gauge your level of emotional awareness.
Ooh.
That's a good idea.
So if you're listening to this,
Yeah.
it might be a good time to pause and kind of reflect
Yeah.
on your own tendencies.
Okay.
Do you typically hit the gas or slam on the brakes when conflict arises?
I think I'm more of a gas pedal person.
Yeah.
But I'm working on it.
Well, recognizing your pattern is a huge step toward changing it.
Okay, so we've established that conflict is often about perception
Right.
and that our initial reactions can be pretty counterproductive.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But how do we move beyond those knee-jerk responses and start actually resolving conflicts in a healthy and productive way?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
It is.
And this is where Mark Manson's Choose Your Own Adventure guide
Okay.
offers a really interesting reframe.
Oh, tell me more.
He suggests that conflict
Yeah.
is often less about being right or wrong
Okay.
and more about differing values.
Ooh, differing value.
It's not just about the surface-level disagreement.
It's about what those disagreements reveal about our core beliefs and priorities.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Right.
It's like that classic argument about who's going to do the dishes.
Oh, yeah, the dishes.
On the surface, it's about a chore.
Mm-hmm.
But underneath, it might be about feeling respected,
Right.
valued, or appreciated.
Totally.
It's not really about the dishes at all.
Not really.
And the relationship therapy blog takes this idea even further.
Oh, how so?
They point out that our expectations and even our attachment styles play a huge role
Oh, attachment styles.
in how we approach and experience conflict.
So it's not just about what's happening in the present moment. It's
No.
about all the baggage we're bringing to the table from our past experiences.
Exactly.
Especially our childhoods.
Especially our childhoods. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
we're all walking around with these invisible backpacks
Oh, wow.
filled with past hurts, unmet needs,
Yeah.
and learned patterns of relating to others.
That's a powerful image.
It is, right? And when conflict arises, those backpacks can really weigh us down.
They can.
So before we dive into those attachment styles and how they impact conflict,
Yeah.
let's just take a quick pause here.
Okay.
Does that make sense so far?
I think so.
We've covered a lot of ground,
We have.
so feel free to rewind if you need to catch up.
Take your time.
Okay, ready to keep going?
I am.
We're about to get into some really fascinating stuff about how our past shapes our present conflicts.
I'm ready.
And don't worry, we'll also explore some practical strategies for breaking those unhealthy patterns
Okay, good.
and developing more constructive ways of relating to others.
Sounds good.
But first, we need to understand how those patterns develop in the first place.
Right. Get to the root of the problem.
Exactly. And that's where attachment theory comes in.
Attachment theory.
It's a fascinating field of study that explores the impact our early childhood experiences have on our relationships throughout our lives.
Wow, that's huge.
It is.
So tell me more about this attachment theory.
All right, so attachment theory suggests that the way we bond with our primary caregivers
Okay.
in infancy and early childhood,
Yeah.
it shapes our internal working models of relationships.
Internal working model.
Yeah, it's like a blueprint
Oh, okay.
that guides our expectations,
Aw.
our behaviors,
Okay.
and our emotional responses.
In relationships later in life?
Exactly.
Wow. So our early experiences really do shape us that much.
They do.
That's kind of mind-blowing.
It is, right. So are there different types of attachment styles?
Yes, there are.
Okay.
And the relationship therapy blog does a great job of breaking down the most common ones.
Okay, what are they?
So we have secure attachment, anxious attachment,
Yep.
and avoidant attachment.
So secure attachment sounds like the ideal, right?
It is.
Okay.
People with a secure attachment style tend to feel comfortable with intimacy
Uh-huh.
and interdependence.
Oh.
They trust their partners,
Yeah.
communicate their needs effectively, and they don't fear abandonment.
That sounds pretty healthy.
It does, right?
Yeah.
It's like that nice balance.
Okay, so what about the other two styles?
Okay, well, let's start with anxious attachment.
Okay.
The blog explains that individuals with this style often crave closeness,
Ah.
but they also worry about their partner's availability and responsiveness.
Oh, so they might be prone to jealousy,
Yeah.
insecurity,
Yes.
or constantly seeking reassurance.
Exactly.
That sounds exhausting.
It can be.
And what about the avoidant attachment style?
Okay, so people with an avoidant attachment style
Yeah.
tend to be uncomfortable with emotional closeness
Okay.
and intimacy.
So they might prioritize independence
Yes.
and self-reliance
Exactly.
and often appear emotionally distant or detached.
Right. It's like they're keeping everyone at arm's length.
Yeah, so they might have difficulty opening up,
Yeah.
sharing your feelings, or relying on others for support.
You got it.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the blog emphasizes that these attachment styles,
Yeah.
they're not fixed personality traits.
Oh, okay.
They're patterns that develop based on early experiences.
So there's hope.
There is, we can, and with awareness and effort,
Wow.
they can be shifted and modified over time.
That's reassuring to hear.
It is, right?
Yeah, because imagining being stuck in those unhealthy patterns forever
Oh, yeah.
would be pretty discouraging.
Totally.
So how do we start to shift those patterns?
Well, first, it's important to remember that understanding our own attachment style is important,
Okay.
but it's not about labeling ourselves our partners.
Right.
It's about gaining insight into those underlying dynamics that might be fueling conflict.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So if we can recognize those patterns,
Uh-huh.
maybe we can start to interrupt them
Right.
and choose more conscious ways of responding.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like taking control of the narrative
Totally.
instead of just reacting on autopilot.
And that brings us to the practical side of things.
Okay, practical tips.
What concrete strategies can we use to navigate conflict more effectively?
Well, both helpguide.org
Okay.
and the University of Washington's toolkit
Uh-huh.
offer some really practical tips for managing those heated moments
Okay.
and having more constructive conversations.
I'm all ears.
So they both highlight the importance of clear and assertive communication.
Oh, yeah. Communication is key.
It's about expressing your needs and feelings directly,
Okay.
respectfully,
Yeah.
and without blaming or attacking the other person.
Right. It's not about winning.
Exactly.
It's about understanding.
And helpguide.org emphasizes the power of I statements.
As statements.
So instead of saying, you always make me feel unimportant,
Okay.
you could say, I feel hurt and unimportant when you consistently forget our plans.
That's a great example.
Right.
Yeah, it shifts the focus from blaming
Yeah.
to expressing your own experience.
Which makes it less likely to trigger defensiveness in the other person.
Right, because no one likes to be attacked.
Exactly.
And the UW toolkit stresses the importance of active listening.
Oh, active listening.
It's not just about waiting for your turn to speak.
Mm-hmm.
It's truly trying to understand the other person's perspective,
Even if you don't agree with it,
even if you don't agree with it.
that's the hard part.
It is.
So active listening involves paying attention not just to the words being spoken,
Okay.
but also to the nonverbal cues,
Oh, the nonverbal cues.
body language,
Yeah.
tone of voice,
Mm.
facial expressions.
It's all part of the message.
It is.
Yeah.
It's about putting aside your own judgments and assumptions
Ah, that's hard.
and genuinely trying to step into the other person's shoes.
It's like empathy in action.
It is.
It sounds like a skill that takes practice,
It does.
especially when emotions are running high.
It's so hard to stay calm in those moments.
It is, but the more you practice, the better you'll become at truly hearing what the other person is saying,
Yeah.
even in the midst of disagreement.
So speaking of disagreement,
Yes,
we can't talk about conflict resolution without talking about compromise.
absolutely not.
And Mark Manson has some really interesting insights on this topic.
Oh, yeah. What does he say?
He distinguishes between what he calls moral values,
Moral value.
and I like stuff values.
I like stuff value.
I love that distinction.
Me too. It's very clear.
So moral values would be those deeply held beliefs about right and wrong,
Okay.
like honesty, integrity, compassion.
Like the big stuff.
the big stuff.
Yeah.
And I like stuff values are more about preferences,
Okay.
like what kind of music we enjoy,
Yeah.
or how we like to spend our free time.
Those are easier to compromise on,
Right.
usually.
So he's saying that conflicts about like stuff values are probably easier to compromise on.
Yes, because they don't strike at the core of who we are as people.
Okay.
It might be annoying if your partner constantly blasts heavy metal music
Oh, yeah.
when you prefer classical.
Yeah, I get that.
But it's unlikely to threaten the foundation of the relationship.
Right.
But when those moral values clash, that's when things get more complicated.
Yeah, because those are non-negotiables.
Right.
So let's say one partner is deeply committed to environmentalism
Okay.
and the other consistently disregards eco-friendly practices.
That's tough.
That's a values clash.
Yeah.
That could lead to serious tension and resentment.
Absolutely.
So what does Manson suggest we do when faced with those seemingly insurmountable conflicts?
He asks this really thought-provoking question.
Oh, what is it?
Is the pain of compromise
Okay.
worse than losing the relationship?
Wow, that's a tough one.
It is.
It forces us to weigh the costs and benefits,
Right.
to consider whether the relationship is worth the effort of bridging that values gap.
Sometimes it's not.
Yeah, sometimes it's just not.
And he highlights that true compromise
Yeah.
isn't about one person giving in
Okay.
and the other person getting their way.
Right, it's not about winning or losing.
No, it's about finding a solution that works for both people,
Yeah.
even if it means both parties making concessions.
That's real compromise.
It is.
But the relationship therapy blog reminds us
Yes.
that compromise, even when necessary, shouldn't come at the expense of our well-being.
Oh, that's a good point.
We shouldn't feel pressured to tolerate behavior that is harmful,
Right.
disrespectful,
Yeah.
or violates our boundaries.
Absolutely, there are limits.
Right.
It's about finding that delicate balance
Yeah.
between honoring our own needs and nurturing the relationship.
And sometimes that balance might mean recognizing that the relationship isn't healthy or sustainable,
Right.
even if we love the other person.
Even if we love them.
And while walking away from a relationship is never easy,
No, it's not.
it can be an act of self-love and preservation.
It can be.
So we've explored the importance of communication,
Right.
active listening,
Yeah.
and compromise.
Uh-huh.
But before we move on to those red flags, that might signal a relationship is in trouble.
Yeah.
I want to circle back to something Mark Manson said earlier.
Okay.
He mentioned that a little conflict can actually be a healthy sign in a relationship.
Oh, yeah, he did say that.
It might seem counterintuitive,
He does.
but he argues that those disagreements, when handled constructively,
Yeah.
can actually strengthen the bond.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
It can reveal our true colors,
Uh-huh.
show us who's truly there for us when things get tough,
I like that.
and even help us clarify our values and expectations.
So it's not about striving for some impossible ideal of perfect harmony.
Right.
It's about embracing those inevitable bumps in the road as opportunities for growth.
And deeper understanding.
That's a much healthier perspective.
It is.
I like that.
So conflict, when approached with awareness and compassion,
Yes.
can be a catalyst for transformation, both individually and as a couple.
That's beautiful.
Okay, that's actually quite reassuring.
Yeah.
It takes some of the pressure off, knowing that we don't have to avoid conflict at all costs.
Totally.
In fact, those disagreements can actually bring us closer together in the long run.
That's great to hear.
It is.
So now, having said that,
Yeah.
there are definitely times when conflict crosses the line from healthy to harmful.
Right.
And that's what we'll be exploring next.
Okay, bring on the red flags.
Those warning signs that maybe the conflict in your life
Yeah.
has tipped over from healthy to something a little more concerning.
Okay, I'm ready for it.
All right, let's do it.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground already, talking about how conflict is fundamentally about perception.
Yeah, it's not always about the objective facts.
Right, it's about how we interpret things.
And how threatened we feel.
And we talked about how our reactions to conflict can be influenced by our past experiences.
It's especially those early childhood experiences.
Right, like those invisible backpacks we carry around.
Filled with all that baggage.
And that brings us to attachment theory.
Oh, yeah, attachment theory.
Yeah. Which explores how those early bonds with our caregivers shape our relationships later in life.
It's pretty fascinating stuff.
So we were just starting to talk about the different attachment styles.
Right, those patterns of relating to others.
So you mentioned secure attachment, anxious attachment, and avoidant attachment?
Yeah, those are the main ones.
And we were saying that secure attachment sounds like the ideal.
It is, it's like the gold standard.
So can you remind me what characterizes a secure attachment style?
Sure, so people with a secure attachment style, they tend to feel comfortable with intimacy and interdependence.
So they're not afraid to get close?
Exactly. They trust their partners, they can communicate their needs effectively,
Right.
and they don't constantly fear abandonment.
That sounds so healthy.
It is, right. It's like that nice balance of closeness and independence.
Okay, so what about the other two styles?
All right, well, let's start with anxious attachment.
Okay.
Individuals with this style, they often crave closeness,
Okay.
but they also tend to worry a lot.
About what?
About their partner's availability, responsiveness.
Oh, so they might be prone to jealousy,
Yeah,
insecurities.
absolutely.
Maybe constantly seeking reassurance.
Exactly. They might also be overly accommodating to their partner's needs,
Oh, really?
even at the expense of their own,
Why would they do that?
out of fear of rocking the boat, you know?
Oh, so it's like they're trying to avoid conflict.
Yeah, but it can backfire because their own needs aren't being met.
That makes sense.
And it can be really exhausting for both people involved.
Okay, so then what about the avoidant attachment style?
So People with an avoidant attachment style tend to be uncomfortable with emotional closeness
Okay.
and intimacy.
So it's like the opposite of anxious attachment.
In a way, yeah.
So they might prioritize independence,
Yeah,
self-reliance,
exactly.
and they might appear emotionally distant or detached.
Right. They might have difficulty opening up,
Yeah.
sharing their feelings,
Uh-huh.
or relying on others for support.
That's got to be tough in a relationship.
Yeah, it can be, and it often leads to conflict because their partner might feel neglected or unimportant.
So where do we go from here? Like, are we just stuck with these attachment styles?
Well, the good news is that these attachment styles aren't set in stone.
Oh, that's good to hear.
They're patterns that developed based on our early experiences, but
Right.
with awareness and effort, they can be shifted and modified over time.
So there's hope.
There is definitely hope.
So how do we start to shift those patterns?
Well, the first step is awareness,
Okay. Becoming aware of our own attachment style.
Exactly, and recognizing how it might be playing out in our relationships.
And remember, it's not about labeling ourselves or our partners.
Right. It's not about blame.
It's about understanding.
It's about gaining insight into those underlying dynamics that might be fueling the conflict.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's like we're becoming detectives in our own relationships.
Totally. We're trying to figure out what's really going on beneath the surface.
Okay, so once we've identified our attachment style,
Yeah.
then what?
Then we can start to challenge those old patterns.
And make more conscious choices.
Exactly. It's about taking control of the narrative instead of just reacting on autopilot.
That makes sense.
So how about we move on to some practical strategies for managing conflict more effectively?
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's get practical.
All right, so both helpguide.org and the University of Washington's Toolkit offer some really helpful tips
Okay.
for managing those heated moments.
Yeah, those moments when you just want to scream.
Exactly, and for having more constructive conversations.
Okay, so what are some of those tips?
Well, they both emphasize the importance of clear and assertive communication.
Oh yeah, communication is key.
It really is. It's about expressing your needs and feelings directly,
Okay.
respectfully,
Uh-huh.
and without blaming or attacking the other person.
Right, it's not about winning or losing.
Exactly. It's about understanding each other.
So how do we do that? Like, how do we communicate more effectively during conflict?
Well, helpguide.org talks about the power of I statements.
Oh yeah, I state.
So instead of saying, you always make me feel unimportant,
Right.
you could say, I feel hurt and unimportant when you consistently forget our plans.
Oh, that's a good example.
It shifts the focus from blame to expressing your own experience.
Which makes it less likely to trigger defensiveness in the other person.
Right, because no one likes to feel attacked.
Exactly.
And the UW Toolkit also stresses the importance of active listening.
Oh yeah, active listening.
It's not just about waiting for your turn to speak.
It's about really trying to understand.
It's about truly trying to understand the other person's perspective.
Even if you don't agree with it.
Even if you don't agree with it, that's the hard part.
It's so hard to stay open-minded when you feel like you're right.
I know, but active listening involves paying attention not just to the words being spoken,
Uh-huh.
but also to the nonverbal cues.
The nonverbal cues like what?
Body language,
Oh yeah.
tone of voice, facial expressions.
It's all part of the message.
It's about putting aside your own judgments and assumptions
That's hard.
and genuinely trying to step into the other person's shoes.
So it's like empathy in action.
Exactly.
It sounds like a skill that takes practice.
It does, especially when emotions are running high.
It's so easy to get caught up in your own feelings.
It is, but the more you practice,
Yeah.
the better you'll become at truly hearing what the other person is saying.
Even in the midst of disagreement.
Exactly.
All right, so we've talked a lot about the different aspects of conflict.
Yeah, like how to understand it, how to communicate better,
Right. And how our past experiences can shape our reactions.
attachment styles, all that good stuff.
But now I think it's time to talk about those red flags.
Oh, yeah, the warning signs?
Yeah, those moments when you realize maybe this conflict is a sign of something bigger.
Right, like maybe the relationship itself is in trouble.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we know when that line has been crossed?
Well, one of the most obvious red flags is when conflict becomes the dominant mode of communication in a relationship.
Oh, okay. So it's not just about having disagreements here and there.
Right. It's when you're constantly arguing, bickering, or just generally disagreeing more than you're connecting.
More than you're enjoying each other's company.
Exactly. It's like the relationship starts to revolve around the conflict itself.
Instead of the love and shared interest that brought you together in the first place.
Yeah, it becomes less about working through disagreements.
And more about a constant power struggle.
Or just a cycle of negativity.
And, the relationship therapy blog was pretty clear that feeling safe is essential in a healthy relationship.
Oh, absolutely. Safety is key.
So how does that tie into conflict?
Well, if conflict consistently makes you feel unsafe,
Okay.
whether physically or emotionally, that's a major red flag.
So feeling physically unsafe is pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, but what about emotionally unsafe?
What does that look like in the context of conflict?
It could manifest in different ways.
Okay.
Maybe you're constantly walking on eggshells, afraid to speak your mind
Yeah.
or express your needs for fear of your partner's reaction.
Oh, or maybe you're constantly being put down, criticized, or made to feel small during disagreements.
Exactly. It could also involve manipulation, gaslighting, or emotional blackmail.
Those are some serious red flags.
They are. These tactics create an environment where you don't feel comfortable being your authentic self.
Or expressing your true feelings.
Right, and that's not healthy for anyone.
And the helpguide.org article also pointed out that unresolved conflict is another major warning sign.
Oh yeah, unresolved conflict can really eat away at a relationship.
If you find yourselves having the same arguments over and over again without ever reaching a resolution or even a sense of understanding.
It's like that broken record analogy.
Oh yeah, the same song playing on repeat.
Exactly, and it can be incredibly draining and demoralizing.
For everyone involved.
For sure.
So let's say you're listening to this and you're realizing,
Yeah.
hey, some of these red flags sound a little too...
It's easy to fall into denial.
Yeah.
Or make excuses for our partner's behavior.
Especially if we're scared to rock the boat.
Exactly, but recognizing the problem is the first step towards addressing it.
So once you've acknowledged it, then what?
The next step is to communicate your concerns to your partner.
Ooh, that can be a tough conversation.
It can be, so approach it with as much compassion and clarity as you can muster.
The helpguide.org article really stressed the importance of I statements in these conversations.
Oh yeah, I statements are so helpful.
It's about expressing your own feelings and needs without blaming or accusing the other person.
Right, so instead of saying, you're always so disrespectful, try saying something like, I feel hurt and disrespected when you interrupt me or dismiss my opinions.
It's subtle, but it makes a huge difference.
It does. It shifts the focus from attack to vulnerability.
And opens the door for a more productive dialogue.
And remember, be prepared for your partner to react defensively.
That's natural.
It's natural to feel threatened when our behavior is being called into question.
So the UW Toolkit suggests setting aside a specific time to talk.
Oh, that's a good idea.
When both of you are calm and can approach the conversation with clear heads.
And if things start to get heated, don't be afraid to take a break.
Yeah.
And come back to it later when you've both had a chance to cool down.
Sometimes just having a name for the problem can be helpful.
Oh, totally.
Maybe you say something like, I feel like we've been stuck in a negative pattern of conflict lately.
Yeah.
And I'd really like to find a way to work through this together.
That's a great way to start the conversation.
And if you're both open to it, seeking professional help can be incredibly beneficial.
Oh, for sure. A therapist can provide a safe and neutral space.
Yeah.
To explore those underlying issues that might be fueling the conflict.
And to develop healthier communication patterns.
And even if your partner isn't willing to go to therapy, individual counseling can still be really valuable.
Absolutely.
It can help you gain a deeper understanding of your own patterns.
Your triggers and your needs within the relationship.
And sometimes therapy can help you recognize when a relationship simply isn't salvageable.
That can be a tough realization.
It can be, but sometimes walking away is the healthiest and most loving choice you can make for yourself.
So it's not always about fixing the relationship.
Right. Sometimes it's about prioritizing your own well-being.
And it's important to remember that you're not alone in this.
Absolutely not. Conflict is a universal experience.
And there are resources available to help you navigate those challenges.
Whether it's therapy, self-help books, or even just talking to trusted friends and family.
There's the PERD out there.
So if conflict is consistently causing you more pain than joy, don't hesitate to reach out for help.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into conflict resolution.
We have from understanding its roots in perception and attachment styles.
To exploring practical strategies.
And recognizing those red flags that might signal a relationship is in trouble.
And I think the biggest takeaway here is that conflict is a natural part of life and relationships.
It is. It doesn't have to be a bad thing.
In fact, when approached with awareness and compassion,
yes,
it can be an opportunity for growth, connection, and deeper understanding.
Absolutely. And if you're walking away from this episode feeling a little more equipped
to navigate those inevitable disagreements in your own life, then we've done our job.
Remember, communicate clearly.
Listen actively.
Be willing to compromise.
And prioritize your well-being.
And don't hesitate to reach out for support when you need it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration.
Into the complexities of being human.
See you then.